hopefully people can kind of quietly come back in. I know some people had to go make calls or do stuff outside, but we want to try to stay on track. We're going to be talking about engaging equestrian communities and strengthening the connections between thoroughbred aftercare and the equestrian world across all disciplines and regions. With me, I have Tasha Rose, who's the Executive Manager of Equestrian Affairs Projects for the Hong Kong Jockey Club, Lindsay Greenway, Membership and Handicap Director for the U.S. Polo Association, and Dr. Kenji Kurosue, a veterinarian and Chief Manager, of the Equestrian Affairs Division of the Equine Department at the JRA. So thank you guys for all being here. And I'd like to start off, and we can just go right down the row if you want. If you guys could each give us a little bit of background with regards to what your involvement is in horse racing and aftercare, or equestrian sports and aftercare, just to give us some insight into where you're coming from on this panel.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. So I am running both the Restart program for the Hong Kong Jockey Club, which is our aftercare program, and that's an aftercare model that spans mainland China. We have a base there in Hong Kong and also an overseas strategy. But I kind of wear a couple of hats because I'm also the team manager for our equestrian team, so Team Hong Kong China. That spans from our youth program up to kind of our Asian Games and Olympic level athletes. So this topic's kind of very, very well versed for us in that, you know, our equestrian affairs department spans both sides. My background is British horse racing, so my first interest in the sport and also in aftercare was a weekend job at ROR, the retraining of racehorses. So that's kind of what got me hooked. I had my own thoroughbred, took him to university, and yeah, the rest, I suppose, is history.
Thank you. How about you, Lindsay?
Yeah, so I am a lifelong horsewoman. Got my first taste of thoroughbreds after college when I moved here to Lexington for an internship. But that quickly transitioned to a job with the U.S. Polo Association, where I've been for 14 years. With that, though, I was pulled kind of back into thoroughbred aftercare by getting involved with the Retired Racehorse Project and their makeover that they have here every year. I've been the polo steward for the last 7 years with that program, and love every part of coming and seeing that program every year. On a personal level, I also compete in the hunter jumper circuit on my off-the-track thoroughbred and take some other horses off the track and have retrained a few of them myself. And that's about it.
Thank you. How about you? Can you give us a little background on your involvement?
Thank you, Jen. I'm Kenji Kurosue from JRA. I spent first 10 years as a veterinary clinician at the JRA racing training facilities. From there, I moved to breeding affairs department and worked at JRA breeding and earring firm. I was in charge of not only pre-training of earrings, but also retraining retired racehorses. Now I'm Chief Manager of Equestrian Affairs Division of Equine Department. I have also been a member of IFAR Horse Welfare Committee since 2023. Since the day before yesterday, I have had the opportunity to tour not only equestrian facility, but also a racehorse breeding farm in Kentucky. And I'm amazed how large they are. So incompatible to those in Japan. Today, I would like to tell you about the JRA's unique approach to introducing retraining methods into earring to pre-training we are going now.
Thank you. And so I'd like to start this panel off with you, Lindsay, because like you said, I mean, your professional world involves polo, and thoroughbreds are so popular in the sport of polo, obviously here in the US, but elsewhere. And you also, as an amateur, compete in the hunter-jumper world, and thoroughbreds are not as well liked by some in the hunter-jumper world. There's a lot of stereotypes against them in the US, and it makes them a lot harder to place than one would like, what we're trying to change. So can you kind of talk through that and give us a lay of the land and your thoughts on why that might be?
Yeah, I think overall there's a common misconception about thoroughbreds that they're all kind of hot and, you know, not suited for anything outside of racing. And personally, I think that's a huge misconception, especially with years of coming to the Retired Racehorse Project and seeing thoroughbreds of every shape and size excel at multiple disciplines. It's not just that Boyd's using them for eventing, it's that people are using them for barrel racing. and competitive trail. And polo is a big one for me because anytime I see an advertisement of a thoroughbred mare who's 15 hands tall, the immediate thought is it would be great for polo. Which is interesting. My mare that I do the hunters with was actually advertised as a polo prospect because she is a chestnut mare. She's 15.2, but let me tell you, she can jump 3 foot like it's no big deal. So I think that misconception is hard to get around, but I think it's slowly getting better through programs like Retired Racehorse and proving that these horses are great athletes after their racing career. I think there's also some misconceptions that horses sustain injuries in racing that then limit what they can do after the track. And I think if you did radiographs on most sport horses, you'd find injuries. It's not just that they start with them off the track, that does happen in any sport horse's career.
Yeah, no matter the breed, sometimes the horse is its own worst enemy. Tasha, I'd love to go to you because I know in Hong Kong you have a program where a stipend is collected when a horse is imported into the country for racing that then helps to cover their transition out of racing at the conclusion of its career. So can you talk through that program a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a quite a unique model, as you say, Jen, in that we don't breed in Hong Kong. So all of the horses that race or in the equestrian sport field are all imported. But on the racing side, when an owner is bringing a horse into Hong Kong, they put up 100,000 Hong Kong dollars into a fund, which the club then has while that horse is in its racing career. So that's about £10,000, which I think is broadly about 13,000 US dollars. That's held by us until that horse then retires. And then the owner has an option. So they have two options. So option one is that they retain the ownership of that horse, and then they export that horse overseas, and they sort out the retirement option, and they get that money back. And actually, recently, the club has actually topped up that fund, so they get an extra $50,000 on top of that 100,000 Hong Kong dollars, and that goes towards the horse's retirement plan. Or if they don't want to do that, they can donate the horse to the club. It comes under our ownership, and it goes into our Restart program. And then it filters through our program, and then we find the right outcome and the right second career for that horse. Now, that funding, and then we retain that 100,000, that helps fund our program. That funding is incredibly important. That's topped up by the Hong Kong Jockey Club, because of course that money doesn't cover everything. But that money has also helped us expand our program and have these strategy pillars which underpin our program and help support what we do. And that's looking at having overseas partnerships. That's looking at developing our traceability capabilities. But in terms of the program in Hong Kong, we've got a dual site model. We've got a base in Hong Kong, we've got a base in Chung Fa, and our training base in mainland China. Every single horse goes through assessments. They go through veterinary checks at the very minimum on a weekly basis. We've got a team of expert professionals that are retraining those horses and looking for those purposeful outcomes. And we really do try and match the horse to the right outcome. We have 6 weekly what we call panel assessments, where vets, farriers, managers are looking at probably about 50 horses each time that are ready to move on to their next career. And we look at the feedback from the rider. We look at the feedback from the person on the ground that's looking after them. We look at their trainability aspect. And that then helps us make that decision in where those horses are going. And just some examples here of the second career outcomes. And I think what's quite also unique to Hong Kong is our equestrian industry is built off the back of the racing industry. You know, one of our riding schools could have up to 70% thoroughbreds, retrained thoroughbreds, that are teaching people to ride and that are part of that equestrian community, and it's just intertwined and ingrained in our industry.
And so that's something I wanted to talk with you about too, because you mentioned in your introduction, and I've read online, that the equestrian side of things is so interconnected. It falls under the Hong Kong Jockey Club, and you deal with a lot of that on both sides. So how does that influence the perception of thoroughbreds over there? You've heard what it is here and in some other parts of the world. So can you talk us through that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned earlier, my background was British racing, and I was a pony mad girl, and I grew up riding in the UK. I had not sat on a thoroughbred or even thought about being involved with retired thoroughbreds until I was kind of well into my teenage years. It just wasn't a thing. Whereas that's totally different in Hong Kong. Now, of course, we're not putting brand new people on lead reins on thoroughbreds, not at all. But still, very novice riders are learning to ride on thoroughbreds. Racing in Hong Kong can't survive without the equestrian industry. And the equestrian industry there can't survive without racing. They're so intertwined, and it's not the case in many other countries. I think racing relies a lot on equestrian in other countries, but equestrian doesn't necessarily rely on racing. And I think the positive side of that is there is no differentiation in Hong Kong in terms of the breed. A horse is a horse. You know, my youth squad riders, it doesn't matter whether they're getting on a retired thoroughbred to go and compete or they're getting on a warm blood. It's not that differentiation. It's just what's the right horse for that job, what's available, you know, who's going to get the best results. And we're even thinking about in our selection policy for our youth riders, you know, they've got to hit criteria, they've got to show results, they've got to demonstrate their ability, but we're actually thinking of the future of having a selection process whereby they get credit for developing thoroughbreds. You know, if they're going to take some young thoroughbreds and help us advance that, we're wanting to allocate credit to their skills and ability in doing that to then represent Team Hong Kong China and be in our youth program. So it really, and nobody thinks about, oh, well, you've ridden a thoroughbred, you've done well on that. It's just part of the program. So it's what we all grow up in Hong Kong, that the two industries are so closely linked, which I think is a real great advocacy for the thoroughbred.
Oh, for sure. That's fantastic. I'd love to go to Kenji now. You have such a deep background in working with racehorses and young thoroughbreds, and based on those experiences, you've developed an approach to working with yearlings in their pre-racing backing and training that incorporates a lot of groundwork and other horsemanship skills. Can you offer us some insights on what that approach is in young thoroughbreds and how it prepares them not only racing, but for their lives after the racetrack?
Can I use the video?
Yes, yeah, you
Okay.
have a video that shows this as well.
Yes, please. So retired horse races have been actively used riding horse in Japan. So therefore, JRA has worked to find effective and less stressful retraining methods. JRA have 2 yearling farms. We are trying to introduce retraining methods into the breaking and pre-training of race horses. Next video is example of breaking before introducing retraining methods. There have been some experiences that have not been happy for both horse and handlers. It's important to apply 3 concepts in breaking earrings as well as retraining, desensitization, respect, and pressure and release. Trot driving is the main part of breaking. Pressure and release is based on the negative reinforcement theory of operant conditioning, which is escape from something unpleasant. In case of trot driving, primary reinforcement is negative reinforcement. Secondary reinforcement is positive reinforcement. This means getting rewarded by cues caused by learning negative reinforcement. By controlling speed and direction by trot driving before riding, it becomes much easier to control the horse after riding. Trot driving is effective method because handler and horse can easily maintain their balance. However, trot driving has one big disadvantage. It makes me very, very, very tired. If the horse cannot build a good relationship with handler in the breaking, we will do join up. When I lower my head, she feels the release of pressure. She regarded me as alpha or leader. And she is also licking me and chewing sign. And she lowered her head and kept giving me licking and chewing signs. She was difficult to handle, but after experiencing join up, she was finally able to win Group 3 races in her career. This horse was purchased at earring sale and was said to be difficult to catch in his box. After grazing on the first day, when I tried to catch him, I could not catch him for half an hour. So I did join-up training for about 20 minutes. By building a good relationship through join-up, he began to follow and focus on me. I tried again that evening in his box to see if he would focus on me. It's obvious that he is in a parasympathetic dominant state, including licking and yearning. The next day, I asked the staff member to do join nap. Licking sign was observed, and when the staff signals a stop, he spontaneously chose to focus on the staff. He won a race at 2 years old. He is progeny of Nadal, that was the winner of Arkansas Derby, trained by Bob Baffert. This video shows a summary of JRA's pre-training. After 3 weeks driving, pre-training is done with the awareness of training in hard. When single file training becomes possible, training is done in double or triple file on the uphill course and the trap course as well. This 3-year-old horse was pre-trained using retraining methods, but was unable to race due to throat problem and became a riding horse. She seems to have become obedient riding horse that respect people. This is the positive reinforcement. We hope that this will enable retired race horses to make a smoother transition in riding horses. That's all for me. Thank you.
That was fantastic. I feel like I would be so much fitter if I took that approach to jogging behind the horses. Kenji, I want to stick with you and skip to the third question that we talked about. Over the past 10 years, the JRA has made great strides in supporting thoroughbred aftercare, from mandatory retirement criteria for athletes that are not competitive to retraining facilities that manage a horse's foundational retraining for competitive or recreational riding. Can you please tell us about those initiatives and what the typical process is for horses to transition from racing to a successful second career?
All right. As you mentioned, horse welfare in Japan does not have a long history. So we first decided to learn about the second career of retired race horses from the organizations such as Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance in the United States and the retraining of race horses in United Kingdom. In addition, since 2018, JRA was working to find effective and less stressful retraining methods. As I mentioned earlier about the presentation of pre-training, it's important to apply 3 concepts in breaking earrings as well as retraining: desensitization, respect, and pressure and release. I think it's important to thoroughly repeat desensitization, respect, and pressure and release through groundwork for the first 2 months rather than riding the horse from the beginning retraining. Furthermore, patience, which is paramount in horse training, becomes even more important when retraining retired thoroughbred race horses. As a result, we have successful shortening the time it takes to retire race horses to be retired, retraining to become lead horses. At Japanese racetracks were crowded cheer loudly. From approximately 2 years to just 6 months. Naturally, success and equestrian competition horse take more time and depend on the skill of the rider. Unfortunately, in Japan, it's extremely difficult to keep horses out of large enough pasture all day and to have a house in our own backyard. Therefore, we are focusing on retraining retired race horses as easy-to-handle horses that can be ridden by children and beginners, not just competition horses, so that they can have economic activity of their own. That's all.
Thank you. Lindsay, I'd like to go back to you because what Hong Kong and Japan do are so different than what we have in America. And so as we were talking about earlier with some of the negative stereotypes people associate with thoroughbreds, what initiatives do you think are currently improving that situation? And do you have any suggestions for how we in America, based either on what's being done in other countries or just doubling down on anything being done here, could further these efforts to improve those stereotypes?
Yeah, I think there are hundreds of excellent organizations around the country that are doing a great job of this. TAA, THC, the TIP program, RRP are all crucial to, making sure our horses have a place after their racing careers. The number of horses in comparison to both Hong Kong and Japan is a complete difference because we have so many that are bred and raised and born here that there's more to find homes for. I think all of those places are doing a great job, but I think more education to the equestrian community is key. I think figuring out a way to branch the connection between the equestrian community and these retired racehorses that need homes is crucial to continuing having places to put these horses. It's hard to see posts on Facebook where people are looking for a horse and the first thing they say is no thoroughbreds. I think we need to figure out a way to swap that message and really highlight the horses that are the thoroughbreds in general that are doing great in all disciplines and across every aspect of the horse industry.
Thank you. And I've got a question for all of you, and I'm guessing your answers are going to be totally different to this, but it's the idea of thinking about a moonshot. Like if money was not an object and you could come up with something that you feel like would really move the needle on engaging the equestrian community as a whole to highlight the thoroughbred as a desirable sport horse, what would you do? Whether it's in your own country, whether it's in this country or a different country?
I've thought a lot about this question because sometimes, of course, everything needs funding to some extent, but sometimes it's less funding and more behavior change. And of course, you need to set the ball rolling on that. But there's a couple of topics that I kind of constantly hover on. And one is about engaging young people in their, when they're starting riding and when they're going through the pony club or, my background is the British system. So I went through my BHS stages and stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. If I had been exposed to the retired thoroughbred and what they can do and their abilities from a younger age, like how we do in Hong Kong, I would have had a whole host of friends who I rode with who would have been so much more open and more positive about that versatility of the thoroughbred and maybe not had such a differentiation of that, that breed stereotype. So I think engaging young people, competent young people who are going through their exams or pony club or whatever, even if there could be a section in the BHS stage qualifications that is about retraining thoroughbreds and how you do it and have more exposure to that when you're younger, I think could really help bridge that gap and people just carry on that kind of message and carry on their experiences, throughout their riding career. That would be, and I say, I don't think that necessarily takes a huge amount of money, but it's behavior change and it's that brain change of what is possible and how we overcome those challenges.
Perfect. What about you, Lindsay?
I would say, similarly to that some accountability and education are key, and traceability of horses, which was mentioned earlier today. I think that's something the U.S. could do a better job of, and it's something with my job with the U.S. Polo Association, I can't say we are doing because we don't currently have a registry, so we're not tracing horses. But I think finding a way to trace horses after their racing careers is key to knowing how many are doing what they're doing. And I know hundreds of, probably thousands of horses are put into polo each year, and we have no idea how many are off the track thoroughbreds. On a giant big picture, and it might sound a little crazy, I think education of the general public through something like a Netflix series wouldn't be a bad idea. I don't know how many of you watched the one on polo. Personally, I enjoyed it. It gave us one look at the big picture of polo at the highest levels. Polo is so much more than that, but I've been amazed with the number of people that have reached out to me asking questions about polo that have never seen it, never been involved, never done anything. I have friends in a small town in Ohio who run a polo club there. And they said since January, since the Netflix documentary came out, they have gotten 75 calls from people wanting to take lessons from people in random small town Ohio. So I think educating the general public would be really beneficial and giving the positive side of what we all know and do, because a lot of what they see is the negative side.
Thank you. That is that's interesting feedback that you got from the Netflix series, kind of real world feedback right away. Kenji, what about you?
Yeah, for better or worse, Japanese horse industry is centered on the horse racing. And furthermore, in Japan, there are very few equestrian sports like polo, sorry, Jinji, other than and dressage and jumping. In Japan, anime character called Uma Musume, which inspired by famous retired racehorses, are extremely popular. As an aside, the International Museum at Kentucky Horse Park is hosting an exhibit on Japanese horse racing and traditional rituals and so on, including Uma Musume, so be sure to check it out. In part of the popular Uma Musume, the increasing case of retired racehorses often use the name of their racehorses as the name of their riding horse. People who play Uma Musume games but had not interest in horse racing or riding are now betting on horse racing and want to meet famous retired racehorses. We want to retrain famous retired racehorses so that even beginners can ride them. And we want to support their horse so that they can perform well in retired racehorse cup for retired racehorses, provide a place for retired racehorses can thrive. I'm sorry that this is not clear answer to your question, but that's my opinion. We have been and will continue to develop the horse industry other than horse racing by respecting and learning from other countries regarding the utilities of retired racehorses. That's all.
Thank you. And my next question is for any of you. If you have an answer to it, if you don't, I'm not going to force you to speak up. But we're talking about these negative stereotypes and bridging the gaps between the racing industry in the equestrian world. Are there any easy or real-world applications that you can think of that those of us in aftercare organizations or those of us on the racing side can do to make incremental forward progress in that direction?
Well, my answer's not easy. It's definitely not easy, but the one thing that we talk about a lot in Hong Kong and then in global forums and when I'm speaking with colleagues who are running different jurisdictions and programs is about how the impact of that kind of one last race or the last 5 races, in terms of that sustainable and responsible retirement. Racing is a highly competitive sport. That's a no-brainer. Everybody wants to win for the prestige, the status, the prize money. Did your bloodlines work out and how you're breeding them? But we need, I think, owners and trainers, we need to work kind of in a more collaborative way in that retirement space to make sure that that horse is retired in a positive way that has a sustainable aftercare or second career. Bridging the equestrian and racing industries together, I think part of the equestrian stereotype is a lot of retired thoroughbreds are broken. And sure, a proportion of them are. But how can we look at that in a more sustainable way? How can we work with the racing industries and the owners and trainers to ensure that they're retired in the best possible shape to give them that best second career outcome that gives that second career outcome longevity, quality and longevity? Because the racing industry is only as sustainable as its aftercare industry, and that will only become, with more and more pressure from society, from the welfare space. So I think much more behavior change and scientific veterinary research on that one last race. When should you be retiring those horses, and when would that last couple of races actually tip that horse over so it doesn't actually have a very good outcome or couldn't do a huge amount more post its racing career? So it's not easy, but that would be something, again, a little bit more moonshoot that I really want this aftercare space and the racing and equestrian industries to work together and develop further.
That's great. What about you? Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'm going to expand on that a little bit because I think a phrase heard a lot in the racing world is connections when you talk about the breeder and the trainer and the owner. I think it would be great to expand those connections into the aftercare, into the person who ends up with that horse, and keeping all those people connected. I know I reached out to the gentleman who had trained my mare when she was on the track, and he had to think a little bit because I'm sure he sees tons of horses every year, and he came back with, oh yeah, that little red filly who broke her maiden against all boys. And that was a fun thing for me to hear because that gave my horse a completely different personality, right? Like knowing more about her past and her upbringing. So I think figuring out a way to keep breeders and trainers and previous owners all connected to the end owners of those horses would be really, really key.
Yeah. Kenji, do you have anything on this question that you wanted to add?
Oh, nothing. Okay.
Nothing. I will say, what you just said, Lindsay, reminded me of one thing that a girl who bought one of our homebreds after it retired from racing a couple of years ago told me. She was shopping for thoroughbreds with her parents, and I asked her, like, oh, do you like racing? And she's like, oh, I've really been getting into it. I went a couple of years ago with, it was either her pony club or her, like if she's the member of her Hunter Jumper Association, something like that. But they had the local racetrack invited their equestrian group out to the races for not only a day at the races, but a tour of the backside so they could really see how those horses were living. Thoroughbreds were not on her radar until that happened. And then from the 2 years on, she was obsessed with them. And then her first horse had to be a thoroughbred. So that's what you said about just learning more about your mare and getting that connection with her on-track trainer. I mean, that kind of stuff just is so easy and makes the biggest difference. We've got 3 minutes left. Would anyone like to ask any of our panelists any questions? I'm happy to run a mic up, or someone else can. If not, then
Hi, my name is Kelly. I'm from Caribbean Thoroughbred Aftercare in Puerto Rico. Natasha, how many horses are you guys importing yearly? Do you know?
It depends on ownership demands. I suppose I'll give you a bigger picture of the size of the racing industry in terms of the retirement side. We're retiring 500-ish horses on an annual basis. When the owners are making that decision that I mentioned at the start of whether to retain their ownership and export overseas or whether they enter our program, it's around a 50-50 split. So there's about 250 horses that are coming into our aftercare program. Our total racing population is around about 1,400-ish horses in the whole population. So what Lindsay was saying to earlier in terms of the size and the demographics, it is a small industry. So in terms of our capabilities of what we're able to do, it is very, very different to, Australia, New Zealand, America. So yeah, they're small numbers. So it would be, in the kind of 100 horses that might be coming into that industry on a yearly basis, and I say 500 retiring on an annual basis.
And do you have euthanasia numbers? Do you euthanize on the racetrack?
For obviously catastrophic injuries on the track, yes. We're looking at every horse that's retiring from racing that's then assessed by the vets that's coming into our program. So every single horse that's coming into our program will be assessed by a vet in terms of its suitability to enter into a program. We have different categories of athletic ability. We are also actually just launching a new program at the moment, a kind of pilot study, and looking at horses that we can't keep in Hong Kong. We're obviously quite geographically challenged in terms of space. So horses that we can't keep in Hong Kong for kind of anything more than probably 12 months in terms of a rehab program, we're working with a lot of overseas partners to look at a up to 24-month paddock rest program to see if injuries that these horses have had, if 2 years of paddock rest can actually bring those injuries right, and can those horses then enter into an athletic career. And when I say athletic career, that could be a happy hacker. We're not expecting every horse to go and be competitive or be show jumping. So that's a new program we're looking at the moment that will significantly look at reducing put to sleep rates, but also significantly reducing horses that we think have no outcome. Actually, that 2 years of paddock rest. We're testing that at the moment. It's literally just started in this current season, and we've got a program that we're going for the next 5 years to look at that data and have that professionally analysed, and we hope that could potentially turn into a veterinary study in the future.
Okay, and just last question. Do you race all year round?
We don't in the summer because it's too hot, so we have a down season of kind of about 3 months, just because of the temperatures are just too high in Hong Kong.
Diana Cooper. Lindsay, that's a lovely idea, and it's something that we've long wanted to implement across the industry, to have those who own breed thoroughbreds know what happens. And likewise, was chatting to Boyd Martin a couple of days ago about, on his website, his thoroughbreds. I couldn't trace back because some of them are quite of an age, who had actually bred and raced them and owned them, because that combination is surely very exciting for anybody who loves the thoroughbreds, as all of us in the room. So could we possibly, with the bright minds in the room, try to action that in the next figure out how to action it in the next few months, so that at the next IFAR conference, perhaps it would be something that we could go back to Lindsay and say how grateful we are for her contribution. Thank you.
I don't have a mic, but that's a great idea.
One thing with that, I think, is encouraging people to know their horses' race names. I think that was mentioned by Kenji, is that is a huge thing that happens here in the US. I buy a horse named Backstretch Lady and I change her name to Sunshine because that's what I can do. But I think, and even with the Kentucky 3-Day this year, there's a number of thoroughbreds competing, and I think most of them aren't competing under their jockey club names, and that's hard, because how do you continue to recognize a horse as a thoroughbred if you change its name and its identity?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point as well. With that, we're going to close this panel, but these guys will be here all day long, so you're welcome to ask them questions, and everyone's contact information is also in the program, so also feel free to reach out privately if you prefer. We're going to take about a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back for our next panel and then have some lunch.